Welcome back, deep divers. Ready to download some serious knowledge directly to your brain.
That's right. And lucky for you, you don't even need a USB port.
Today we're trying something new. Our first ever research review.
That's right. We're taking a deep dive into existing research. Well, really one specific piece of research.
And we're going to extract all the juicy insights for you. So no need to spend hours poring over journals and articles.
And academic writing can sometimes be, well, a bit dry.
You can say that again.
We're here to spice things up.
We're your guides to the fascinating world of, well, today at least, of the Sitaleshwar Temple.
Ah, yes, the architectural and cultural marvel that is the Sitaleshwar Temple in Jhalarpatan, Rajasthan.
We're basing our deep dive on the incredible research of Dr. Nikita Rathore.
Absolutely. Dr. Rathore's work has really illuminated this temple's many secrets.
And believe me, this temple has more secrets than you can shake a stick at.
Oh, it really does. From name changes to architectural additions to connections to some of India's most iconic art.
It's like a puzzle box, just waiting to be opened.
Well said. Let's start unpacking, shall we?
Okay, let's start with the basics. This temple has gone through a bit of an identity crisis over the centuries, hasn't it?
It certainly has. And that's our first clue that this place is far from ordinary.
Originally, it seems it was dedicated to Shiva, as Chandramauleshwar, the one with the moon on his head.
Yes. But later on, it gets renamed to Sitaleshwar, or Shitala.
So we have a Shiva temple. That may have also been associated with a goddess. That's pretty interesting. Who is this Shitala?
Well, in Hindu mythology, Shitala is this powerful figure associated with healing, especially from diseases like smallpox.
Ah, so her name means the cool one, like cooling down a fever?
Exactly. It connects to the idea of bringing relief from illness.
So maybe the temple evolved and became a place where people, well, hoped to be healed, especially in those times when disease was so prevalent.
Right. It shows us how temples aren't these frozen-in-time structures. They reflect the changing beliefs and needs of the community.
It's like the temple itself has its own story, a story that unfolds over centuries.
Speaking of centuries, how old are we talking?
We're talking 7th century old. There's a foundation inscription from 689 CE.
Wow.
But even before that, the region was inhabited, maybe as far back as 500 to 1000 BCE.
So layer upon layer of history. Pretty amazing.
It is. And there's even a connection to the Ajanta caves.
Wait, a Hindu temple? Borrowing from Buddhist cave paintings.
It certainly seems that way. There are striking similarities between the door frame of the Garbhagriha, the inner sanctum, and the art and aesthetics we see at Ajanta.
That's a pretty wild connection.
It suggests there was this broader cultural exchange happening. The decorative motifs, the carving style, even the presence of figures like the Karamukas.
Basis of glory, right.
Exactly. They all point towards a stylistic link with Ajanta.
So it's not just about two religions, it's about this fusion of artistic ideas. It makes you think outside the box, Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, what other connections might we find if we looked at the Sitaleshwar Temple as part of a broader network of cultural influences?
That's what's so exciting about this. It's like we're putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle. Now let's step inside. I'm picturing elaborate sculptures, intricate carvings. Am I on the right track?
You are. The Sitaleshwar Temple is especially known for its beautiful pillared hall, the mandapa.
Okay, tell me more about the mandapa.
Well, the pillars are incredibly ornate. Each one tells its own story through the carvings. You'd see male and female figures, Shiva ascetics, even those dikapalas, the guardians of the directions.
Those little details, they really bring the temple to life.
They do, and they tell us about the beliefs of the people who built and worshipped there. For example, the many Shiva ascetics highlight the temple's importance for those devoted to Shiva.
It's like a visual history book.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this mandapa was added later. Was the temple built in phases?
It seems so. The original 7th century structure probably had just the Garbhagriha and the Antarala, like a vestibule. This incredible mandapa with its forest of pillars, that seems to be a 10th century addition.
So the temple grew and expanded as its importance grew.
It appears so.
Did this addition change how people used the temple?
It probably did. I mean, the mandapa would have provided a larger space,
Yeah.
for gatherings, rituals, maybe even performances.
It's like a living organism, always changing.
Exactly.
And this temple has seen a lot of changes, from being dedicated to Shiva as Chandramauleshwar to its later association with Shitala.
Right. And that shift in dedication might be reflected in the sculptures. The original inscription only mentions Shiva.
Right.
But there are these large goddess sculptures. Now in a nearby temple, they could be connected to Shitala.
So the temple story continues to unfold. It's like a puzzle with pieces scattered throughout history. And speaking of clues, the inscriptions found within the temple must tell us a lot, right?
They do. There's one from the 7th or 8th century that mentions a pilgrimage to Himakadara. It hints at a connection to wider pilgrimage networks.
Wow, so people weren't just visiting this one temple.
Right.
They were traveling to multiple sacred sites, these incredible journeys across vast distances.
That's exactly it. And this inscription gives us this glimpse into that broader context. It reminds us that the Sitaleshwar Temple wasn't just an isolated entity.
It was connected to a whole web of beliefs and sacred spaces.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder what other connections we might find if we look closer.
Oh, there are so many more inscriptions to explore. Numerous short ones on the pillars left by pilgrims from the 10th to the 13th centuries. But that's a story for another time.
Okay, you've definitely got me hooked. We've got to dive deeper into those inscriptions and hear those stories from the past. But for now, let's step outside and admire the exterior of the Garbhagriha. What kind of artistry and symbolism will we find there? Okay, so picture this. So we're standing outside the Garbhagriha. That's the inner sanctum, right?
That's right.
It's not just some plain boring walls, is it?
Oh, not at all. It's actually quite a visual feast, even though, well, there's been some restoration work over the centuries.
Right.
So we've lost some of the original artwork. But what's left gives us a good idea of its former glory. Think these beautiful decorative niches called rafikas, and carvings featuring motifs like the Purnagada Kalasha, basically vases of plenty. Overflowing with foliage, it's all about nature and abundance.
I love that. That imagery is so life-affirming. Were there any animals or birds incorporated into the design?
You notice that, yes. You'd see carvings of geese, makaras, those mythical crocodile-like creatures.
Uh-huh.
And of course, the ever-present lotus flower. These symbols would have held a lot of meaning for the people who built and worshipped at the temple.
Okay, decode those symbols for me. What kind of meanings we're talking about?
Think purity, creation, spiritual awakening, the big concepts, really.
Yeah.
The geese, for instance, are associated with purity and spiritual aspiration, while makaras represent creation and the primordial waters.
And the lotus, of course. The classic symbol of rising above challenges.
Exactly. Reaching enlightenment. It's incredible how these motifs drawn from nature convey such profound spiritual ideas, isn't it?
It is. It makes you want to, really pay attention to the details.
Right.
The seemingly small things that actually reveal so much. Now, let's shift our focus a bit to the exterior walls of the Antarala, that space leading up to the inner sanctum. What kind of sculptures do we see there?
This is where we start seeing some of the main deities taking center stage. You'd find Vishnu, Shiva, even those Dikapalas we talked about before.
The Dikapalas. I like to think of them as the temple's security detail,
I like that.
keeping everything in balance. It's so interesting how they're literally built into the design.
It reinforces the idea of this being a sacred, protected space. And seeing Vishnu and Shiva together, that's significant. It really points to the temple's evolution as a place of worship for both Shaiva and Vaishnava devotees.
So not just Shiva, but Vishnu too. It seems this temple took a pretty inclusive approach to worship.
It did. And it shows the dynamic nature of religious beliefs in ancient India. Temples weren't always just about one deity. There was often a mixing of traditions.
It's a good reminder that things aren't always black and white. Now, the research goes into some detail about the individual deity depictions. What stood out to you?
The detail is amazing. Take Vishnu, for example. He's shown seated in a relaxed posture called Lalitasana, holding his characteristic attributes: the mace, discus, and conch. Even his hand gestures are meaningful, like the Apayahasta, the gesture that offers reassurance and dispels fear.
It's amazing how much symbolism is packed into a single sculpture.
It is. And right next to Vishnu, you'd see Varuna, the god of the ocean and guardian of the west. He's shown with his Makara, and he holds a noose and water pitcher.
So even the positioning of these deities is deliberate.
Absolutely. It's like a carefully choreographed cosmic dance. Each figure has its role to play. And this attention to detail, we see it with Shiva as well. He's also shown in Lalitasana, accompanied by Nandi, his bull. He holds his trident, snake, flower, and water pot.
I love that the research mentioned a lifelike carving of Nandi. It just speaks to the skill of the sculptors.
It does. The research actually emphasizes that, describing how Nandi is rendered with incredible realism. They weren't just creating symbols, they were trying to capture the very essence of these beings.
It's like they breathed life into the stone. Now, we've talked a lot about the Shaiva elements. What about the Vaishnava influences?
Well, seeing Vishnu and Varuna so prominently right on the exterior of the Antarala, that's a pretty clear indication. And even though that original inscription dedicates the temple to Shiva as Chandramauleshwar, the fact that it later became known as the Sitaleshwar Temple could reflect a shift in focus, you know?
You're right. So maybe the temple evolved over time to encompass both Shaiva and Vaishnava traditions. That kind of blending of beliefs isn't uncommon in Hinduism.
Not at all. Hinduism is incredibly diverse, with a rich tapestry of traditions, and the Sitaleshwar Temple seems to reflect that. It's a place where devotees of different paths could come together.
It's a great example of unity and diversity. And speaking of beauty, I keep thinking about those decorative motifs on the exterior of the Garbhagriha. Pranagata Kalasha emitting foliage and undulating creepers. It just sounds so lush and vibrant.
It is. Those vases of plenty, overflowing with flowers and fruits, they represent the bounty of nature and the blessings of the gods, of course.
It's such a positive image, a deep reverence for the natural world.
And those creepers, winding across the walls, connecting things, they create this sense of harmony. It's like they're guiding our eyes on a journey.
That's a great way to put it. Now, we can't forget about those pillars in the mandapa. They're supposed to be incredibly ornate, with carvings of all sorts of figures. What were some of the details that stood out to you?
Oh, there's one that's particularly interesting. It's a carving of a Shaiva ascetic feeding Nandi. It highlights the close relationship between Shiva, Nandi, and the ascetics who devoted their lives to Shiva.
It's like a glimpse into the daily life of the temple, the rituals, the offerings.
Right. It reminds us that this wasn't just a static structure. It was a place that was alive, animated by the presence of the deities, the priests, and the devotees.
It's incredible to think about all the stories that unfolded there. Now, this mandapa, you said was a later addition.
Probably from the 10th century, yes.
That suggests the temple was always evolving, adapting to the community's needs.
Exactly. Perhaps there were more devotees, or they wanted a larger space for their rituals.
So the architecture itself reflects not just religious beliefs, but social and cultural changes. It's a fascinating record. Now, you mentioned all those inscriptions left by pilgrims. Time to unlock those time capsules. Okay, let's unlock those time capsules, those pilgrim inscriptions. What stories do they tell?
They're like, little whispers from the past, giving us glimpses into the lives and beliefs of those who traveled to this temple. Some are really simple, just names or short messages.
Right.
But others, they offer a much more personal connection to the past.
I can imagine them, these pilgrims from all walks of life, standing before those ancient walls, etching their hopes and dreams into the stone. It's such a powerful image.
It is. And remember that pilgrim's record we discussed, the one mentioning a trip to Himakadara. It really suggests that this temple was part of this, much larger pilgrimage circuit.
So people weren't just coming to this one spot, they were creating these incredible journeys, visiting multiple sacred sites.
Exactly. And these journeys, they were often arduous, full of challenges, but they were acts of faith, opportunities to connect with the divine. Each step, each inscription was a testament to their devotion.
It makes you appreciate the effort it took. It wasn't just a sightseeing trip. It was a deeply spiritual undertaking.
Absolutely. And for many, I think those journeys were transformative, shaping their beliefs, their outlook on life. They left their mark on the temple, and the temple, in turn, left its mark on them.
Those inscriptions truly connect us to the past. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the architectural design of the temple itself. The research goes into detail about the layout.
Right. So the Sitaleshwar Temple actually follows a fairly typical Hindu temple plan, with the square Garbhagriha at its heart, representing the most sacred space, where the main deity resides. In front of that is the Antarala, that transitional space. And then, leading up to that, you have the Grand Mandapa, the pillared hall.
So it's like a journey inward.
Exactly. From the more public space of the mandapa to the innermost sanctum, where the divine presence is most intensely felt.
It's the architecture guiding you on this journey,
Yeah.
both physically and symbolically. And the research talks about the base of the temple, the walls, the superstructure.
It does. We learn about the moldings, projections that likely held sculptures, and the towering shikara that would have crowned the Garbhagriha.
Sadly, the shikara has collapsed.
It has.
And the temple now has a flat roof with a small dome. A reminder that even these enduring structures are vulnerable to time.
That's true. But even in its altered state, the temple retains its grandeur, its architectural significance. The surviving elements give us incredible insight into the building techniques and artistry of the time.
It's amazing how much we can still learn from these structures. Now, back to that stunning mandapa. Those pillars are described as incredibly elaborate, with carvings of all sorts. What can you tell us about them?
Oh, the pillars are truly a sight to behold. The outer ones have these octagonal bases, adorned with male and female figures, Shiva ascetics, even large diamond motifs. And in the middle section of the shaft, it's faceted, adding this extra layer of complexity. And the upper portion, decorated with a band of kurtimukas and this beautiful bell and chain motif.
Bell and chain carvings. Sounds exquisite. It's like the pillars themselves are wearing jewelry.
And the tops of the pillars, they're equally ornate, with circular moldings and brackets that depict, what are they called? Barabahakas.
Weight bearers.
Yes. Showcasing the engineering, that went into supporting these massive structures.
It's amazing the skill, the precision it must have taken to carve those details on such a grand scale.
Oh, absolutely. And the inner pillars are just as impressive, with square bases topped with those purnagata kalasha, those vases of plenty. The middle and upper portions echoed the design of the outer pillars, but with subtle variations that, well, keep things interesting.
So there's this sense of unity, but also variety.
Mm-hmm.
What about specific figures? Anything stand out?
Oh, yes. There's this carving of a Shiva ascetic, with matted hair, a mustache, and a long beard. He's bare-chested, wearing just a loincloth, and he's holding some unidentified object in his hand. It's a really powerful image of austerity, devotion.
A testament to those who dedicated their lives to spiritual pursuits.
Right. And alongside those ascetics, you'd find depictions of, the Decapolis, of course, maintaining order and balance. One that's been identified as Kubera, the god of wealth, holding his money bag.
So even the seemingly minor figures have their place. It speaks to this idea that everything is interconnected.
It does. It's a holistic worldview where even the smallest detail matters. And there's actually a really noteworthy feature in the mandapa, a statue of Nandi, Shiva's bull, positioned between the central pillars in the last row near the Antarala.
Ah, Nandi. Loyal Nandi. It's like he's guarding the entrance to the inner sanctum.
And in front of him, there's a bowl of food. And a Shiva ascetic is shown holding more food as if feeding Nandi. It's a beautiful image, showing the reverence for this sacred animal.
It's a touching detail. And between Nandi and the Antarala, there's a Shiva linga.
There is, further emphasizing the temple's Shiva identity.
It's like it's all carefully choreographed.
It is. Nandi guides you towards the Shiva linga, leading you on this journey, from the outer realm of the mandapa to the heart of the temple.
A journey that culminates in the Garbhagriha, the inner sanctum. What awaits us as we cross that threshold?
Well, the Antarala, which leads to the Garbhagriha, is described as relatively plain, but there's one striking feature. Its entrance is flanked by 4 pillars that are completely distinct from those in the mandapa.
So even the pillars mark different spaces.
Exactly. And these pillars, they're incredibly ornate. Their decorative motifs are so reminiscent of Ajanta painting.
That Ajanta connection again. We saw it in the doorframe of the Garbhagriha too. It seems to be woven throughout the temple.
It does. These pillars are carved with, purnagata kalasha, those vases of plenty, with foliage emerging from them, and above that foliage, kurtimukas, those faces of glory, emitting festoons. They look so much like the demonic faces painted on the ceilings of the Ajanta caves.
It's like a conversation between 2 artistic traditions, blending Buddhist and Hindu aesthetics.
Exactly. And above the kurtimukas, half medallions with geese, kinnaras, those mythical beings with human and bird features and flowers, all in that Ajanta style.
It's a good reminder that, history isn't always neatly divided.
You're right. There's this constant flow of ideas, artistic expressions.
The Sitaleshwar Temple really embodies that, doesn't it? It's a space where different traditions come together, creating something truly remarkable.
It is.
So we've journeyed through the mandapa, the Antarala, and now we're at the entrance to the Garbhagriha. What awaits us inside?
The entrance itself is pretty spectacular. It's an ornately carved Panchaka door. That means it has, 5 bands of decoration. Think floral motifs, foliage, abundance from the moment you approach.
5 bands. Incredible.
Yeah.
What kind of details and symbolism are we talking about?
Well, on the lower parts, you'd find Shiva, depicted on both sides, along with river goddesses, a nod to that classic Hindu symbolism of water and fertility.
I love that connection to nature.
And Shiva is shown in these different aspects. On one side, he holds his snake and trident, symbols of power and, the destruction of ignorance. On the other side, he's got a drum and staff, representing creation and cosmic rhythm.
It's a reminder that Shiva embodies both creation and destruction.
Exactly, those forces that are always at play. And below him, you'd find Nandi, his faithful companion, as if welcoming you into the sacred space.
Nandi, the ultimate guide.
And flanking Shiva, the river goddesses. They have these graceful curves, these flowing garments, standing beneath umbrellas held by dwarf figures, female attendants surrounding them. It gives you this sense of a royal court.
A beautiful image of feminine grace, abundance, and divinity.
And those umbrellas, they add that touch of regality. The research actually points out that these river goddesses remind us of the famous terracotta goddesses from Ahichattra, from the Gupta period.
Those connections to earlier art, it's fascinating.
It is. And above those river goddesses are the shakas, the decorative bands. That's where you really get that Ajanta influence. Think undulating creepers, flowers bursting forth. There are even animals and birds nestled among the flowers. It's an incredible celebration of nature.
It sounds breathtaking.
And amidst all that, you'd see geese, makaras, lotuses, adding even more layers of meaning, connecting nature to the divine.
As we approach the Garbhagriha, our gaze is drawn upwards to the Lalita Bimba. That's the lintel above the doorway.
Right, and there you'd find a depiction of Lakulisha, a revered Shiva teacher, holding his staff. He's considered a really important figure in Shiva philosophy, so his presence here is significant.
Like he's overseeing those who enter.
Exactly. And earlier accounts actually mentioned a figure of Vishnu on the Uttaranga, the upper frame. Though it's no longer there, another reminder of those Vaishnava influences.
So even the doorway becomes this point of convergence, where the different deities and traditions meet. And as we finally step into the Garbhagriha, we see the Shiva Linga.
We do. The research describes the chamber as pretty simple. The walls are plain. The focus is completely on the Shiva Linga.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound expressions of the divine are the ones that, well, that transcend form and imagery.
You're right. The Shiva Linga embodies the formless, limitless nature of Shiva, that ultimate reality that, well, underlies all of creation.
It's a reminder to look beyond the surface, seek that divine essence within ourselves and all things.
And standing in the Garbhagriha, surrounded by that stillness, the sanctity of the space, it's hard not to feel a sense of awe. The Sitaleshwar Temple, with its layers of history, art, and religion, is a treasure trove of meaning. It's truly a testament to human creativity and devotion.
What an incredible journey. From the grand mandapa to the quiet of the Garbhagriha. It's like the Sitaleshwar Temple has taken us on this pilgrimage, through time, through space.
And as we conclude our deep dive into Dr. Rathore's research on this incredible temple, we're left with this thought-provoking question. Given all the transformations the temple has undergone, its shift in dedication, its blend of Shaiva and Vaishnava elements, how do we interpret the relationship between its original intention and, well, its significance for people today?
That's a great question. It makes you think about how these sacred spaces evolve.
Yeah.
And how their meaning changes.
It does. And it invites us to look for more connections, more influences. Imagine if we expanded our focus, beyond the Sitaleshwar Temple to the network of temples and cultural sites surrounding Jhalarpatan. What would we discover?
So many possibilities.
Oh.
The Sitaleshwar Temple is just one piece of this larger puzzle.
It is. So we encourage you, our listeners, to keep exploring the world of ancient Indian temples, art, and history. There are so many stories waiting to be uncovered.
Who knows? You might even be inspired to embark on your own pilgrimage, tracing the footsteps of those who came before you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.